Hey guys. Again, my name's Nathan Provost. Happy to be talking to you guys again today, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Lutheran Church. I'm Methodist, but it seems like the Lutheran Church seems to come up pretty often within many of my history classes, and I can think back all the way to high school and say I remember learning about it in my AP European History class. Learning about Martin Luther and the 95 Theses posted on the door of the Catholic Church, as well as even his views on Jewish people and his anti-Semitism. But I'm not talking about necessarily Martin Luther or the Lutheran Church in Europe. I want to talk strictly about the Lutheran Church here within the United States. Mark Rehnquist, who wrote Lutherans in America, A New History, he talks about the difference between what Luther wanted versus what Catholic Church doctrine says. And I think the most important point to get from this is that Lutheran diametrically opposed cooperation between works and good grace. Okay. Now, many of the Lutherans, Martin Luther himself, he was German. Obviously Germany didn't exist in that time, but they will be German-speaking people. It will go to Sweden as well as the Netherlands, and that is who is going to come to the United States. They came later, they came after the Puritans, and they will settle in places like Delaware, New York, and then later on in Pennsylvania. That all comes from Mark Rehnquist, page 10. Now, we've talked about in the past that Baptists, Methodists, they spread their denomination quickly throughout the United States, and they were very involved within certain issues going on in the United States, both politically and religiously. This doesn't mean that Lutherans did not take part in these issues either. In fact, they were very aware of these political and religious events, especially in colonial times, all coming from Mark Rehnquist, page 118. Now, even in Pennsylvania, where there was a prominent German population, the ministerium was mostly an informal arrangement centered around a personal authority, and that leader was Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, and he will help lead the Lutheran Church there. Ironically enough, his son would become a Revolutionary War general, and he'll fight in the Battle of Germantown, ironically enough. But with the end of the Revolutionary War, there's a growing sense of new systems of government, and ones that are tailored specifically to a new American identity. Again, this comes from Mark Rehnquist on page 119. And Lutherans are going to begin to fit into that American identity. It will just happen at a slower pace than that of Baptists and Methodists. But they will expand west nonetheless, especially within the late 18th century. Now, the Lutheran Church will begin to break off from one another. And this is because there was not a central force or an organization that was holding all these Lutheran churches together. Each individual local Lutheran church was made up of different groups, whether that was Germans, whether that was Swedes, or the Dutch. And so there's various synods, okay? And synods are simply assembly of the clergy all throughout the country. It's going to be based on local characteristics and its members. So the development of English in these churches will take more time. Again, this will come from Mark Rehnquist on pages 125 and 126. Now, they recognize these issues, but because they did not have, it was not one large organization, it was not one large religious denomination, as so many of these Lutheran churches were split up. The religious leaders avoid talking to their congregants about issues such as revivalism and deism because of this. They all had their different opinions about it. But it just goes to show that there's going to be 24 different catechisms in the Lutheran Church between 1781 to 1820, all on page 131. So this is evidence that shows that there were some that accepted this evangelic teaching and accepted revival, but others believed that the continuation of preaching English within churches would ultimately lead to the downfall of the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church Martin E. Marty actually says in church history that the Lutheran Church not as an immigrant church that needed to be naturalized after it was transplanted from some European land, but as an integral and potent part of American Christianity. This is on page 90. They actually believe that they are an integral part, even though they might not be fully assimilated yet. They were already involved within society, especially over the issue of slavery. Many Lutherans within the North during this time, they will follow Muhlenberg's ideas and views of slavery, and they will be staunchly anti-slavery. That comes from Mark Grainquist on page 181. But Lutherans in Missouri, they're going to try to resolve these debates by taking a more middle ground. Many of them didn't own slaves, but they did not necessarily believe it was sinful to own slaves, but it was a moral evil and the punishment of sin. And the Missouri Synod, though, also began to work with African Americans in the South and established congregations and educational institutions there. They went down all the way to Texas, as far as Texas. So they were already working with African Americans, and they were trying to take a more middle ground approach. This actually comes from Lutherans in the American South, written in Mostly Certainly True, Lutheran History at a Glance, on page 47. Now, there are going to be Lutherans in the South who, many of them didn't own slaves, but some did, and they will actually come to accept the slave institution, but they did want masters to show kindness to their slaves. This comes from Mark Grainquist in Lutherans in America on page 181 as well. And finally, I do want to point out one important character, and that is Franz Siegel, who was German. He was a Lutheran, and he led German soldiers in the American Civil War. So obviously, just because they did not grow as quickly in the early United States, especially in colonial times, does not mean they had their own integral part of American society. They understood these issues. They understood their role, and they were active in the community. They were active in the country. All right. So ultimately, it goes to show that the Lutheran Church will play a much bigger role, especially later on in the Civil War, with mass migration coming from Germany. Thank you.